Hi and welcome back. So in the previous video you saw us setting up our blank page using the grid and putting our guides on to help us with our page layout. So I'm going to use Control' to turn off that grid, and now I'm just going to use our guidelines to begin constructing our page. And in this video what we're going to do is we're going to look at the text tool and how we're going to create our headlines, and this could even be used for your mastheads. So the way we do that is to come over to our text tool and make sure that we are using the horizontal type tool. There's two different choices you can make here. You can either draw a bounding box, which will constrain the proportions of your text, and the great thing is that they snap to our lines, and that means that whatever I type into that box will sit within that shape and it won't spill out on either side. Now, if I just hit cancel here, I'll show you the other way of doing it, is to simply click where we want the text to begin, and then we can freeform and we can type as much as we like. And that will continue on off the side of the page, and it won't sit within any form of bounding box. Now when I'm doing single words or mastheads, I'll tend to favour this format rather than the bounding box, because it gives me a little bit more flexibility on how I can move my text around. So for now, all we're going to do is we're going to suggest that we have some sort of headline on the top of our page. But that doesn't look very impressive as a headline. It's a very small black font. So how would I adjust that? Well, the easiest way of doing it is to double click with your text tool to select it all. And then up here, you will see a little tab, which when you hover over it, tells you that it's the character and paragraph panel. When you click on that, it pops out here on this side, and we've got a huge amount of information in here that enables us to have loads and loads of little tweaks and effects. It all depends on what font you're using as to how many of these little icons down the bottom you'll be able to apply. But you will always be able to vary these ones up here. So what are they? Well, the first one is your font, and you usually get some sort of sample text on the right hand side, and if you hover over it, you'll see on the page up there it will actually change. Now I want to stick with something that's relatively straightforward, so I'm going to stick with the original, that Myriad font. But it's far too small. I could come in here and change the point font size like this. But the great thing about Photoshop is it's much more dynamic. You'll see that there's a little finger with some arrows. If I click and hold, I can actually slide this finger to the right, and it enables me to see in real time what effect I'm having on that text. Oh, I've gone too far there. Roll it back a little bit. And we can get a rough idea of where we want to stop. Now I think probably I could push it up to 130. And that'll sit nicely between my lines. Now before I hit the tick and say I'm good to go, I'm going to come over here to the colour, and I'm going to choose a different colour for my text. I quite fancy using a red, so I'm going to just throw that one up there. And you'll notice that it has highlighted my text and it appears to have gone blue. That's because blue on the colour wheel is the opposite colour to the red, so in order to make it stand out, it highlights it in the opposite colour, the contrasting colour. Other things that I can mess around with are spacing between lines, which we can't really see here because we only have one line of space. We can also extend, so we can stretch the height of our fonts to make them bigger. And we can also stretch the size of the actual letters to make them fill a space, or really usefully, to just crush them in ever so slightly to make them fit. There we go, that'll do. Also here we can choose the spacing between the letters. And I've got that on -40. How about if I put it on -50? What happens there? Oh, perfect. So you can see the gaps between the letters get slightly smaller. When we're happy, we hit the tick, and we've got our headline in place. If you want to nudge it around and move it about, the easiest way of doing that is selecting the Move tool, and then just using the cursor keys up and down and left and right, just to nudge it into the place exactly where you want it. Now, seeing as that was really simple and straightforward, let's move on to a simple and straightforward way of doing columns. So I'm just going to quickly put my grid back on, and I'm going to drag out a guideline just to the top here so that I have a little bit of spacing, breathing space between my headline and the text that I'm going to put in here. Control' will turn my grid off again, and now I'm ready to go. I'll take my horizontal type tool, and I'm going to draw a bounding box inside this area here where I want my column to go. And you'll see I get the marching ants, which is that dotted line moving around, but also it snaps perfectly to the guides that I've put down, so I don't have to worry about whether my column is the right size or not. Now, obviously, I've still got a huge font. In a magazine, you're going to be working somewhere between 8 and probably maximum 12-point font when you're talking about columns. So let's stick it in at 12-point for now. And also, I'm going to change that color to black. That still looks a little bit large to me, so I'm actually going to drop it down to 10-point font. Ah, yes, that looks much more like magazine size font. And I'm going to use Control-C to copy that text, and then quite simply Control-V 4 or 5 times just to fill in this lorem ipsum placeholder text so that I can see what my column is going to look like before I actually copy and paste my article in. Now, the great thing about using lorem ipsum text is once I've created this column, I can actually copy and paste all of these words out of this column and into a Word document, and it will tell me roughly how many words there are in each of my columns and enable me to edit my article so it will fit my layout beautifully. Now, before I hit the tick and say I'm happy with this, let's just come back over here. You notice we've been on character. Now, whoops, I want to go on to paragraph, and you'll see you've got the standard choices you get in Word with justified left, justified center, which you would never see in a magazine column. And the one that you probably would see is to justify left, but to square it off. And that way it looks much more like an actual magazine column, but you do have to deal with lots of these extra spaces in the middle. Now, it's going to look a little bit weird here because I've just repeated the same text over and over again. So that's why you've got this regular pattern. But normally in normal font and normal typing, you wouldn't notice that sort of pattern. If you do, you might need to either rework your article or just settle with that left aligned text. So I'm going to hit tick to accept that. And now you can see my column is beautifully designed. Now, if I was being super lazy, all I need to do is grab hold of that layer, drag it down to the new layer icon and let go. And it's actually duplicated that layer for me. And just using the move tool back over here, which is the shortcut of V, I can just hold down Shift and the left arrow to slide it over perfectly square, or I can just grab hold of it, drag it up into place. And notice how Photoshop will put these pink guides on to show me where things are or aren't lining up. So I'm just going to leave it there because it looks like everything's lining up beautifully. Now, don't forget, these guides aren't going to stay here. So if you hit Control and semicolon, they will all disappear and we can get a really good look at what our columns are going to look like. So hopefully that's given you a great idea about how to do some basic layouts, and in the next video we're going to move into some slightly more advanced typography tools.